All right, so John, why don't we get started? I know there are a few folks that are coming in as we go along, and they'll be admitted automatically. But first, thank you for joining us again, my crime partner. Someone we've done many of these over the years, and I'm always delighted to have an opportunity to speak with you, especially about a topic that is so prescient right now, which is the ongoing war with the United States, with Israel and Iran. And, I was reminiscing earlier, John, when I was in DC and you're still doing this on an ongoing basis, we used to go to a lot of the big banks and Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies and talk to them about sanctions and risk and how geopolitics affects investments. And you're still doing that. At Omnia, as part of our investment philosophy and our investment team, we do similar things. So, when I look at the conflict that's happening now with the United States, Iran, and Israel, it's not only a regional military conflict, but when you think about the Straits of Hormuz and oil markets, natural gas, finance, the stock market, there's a lot of stuff in play. And once again, I'm just delighted that you're giving us your time. I know you're super busy right now, drinking from a fire hose. So we'll have a really interesting discussion. For those who are in attendance, I know a bunch of you sent me pre-submitted questions. John and I will have a conversation for about 20, 25 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A for everybody. So I have the questions that were pre-submitted. You could also submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And for those of you who do not do either and are going to just text me the question, you feel free to do that as well, because that usually works. So, John, welcome.
Thanks, Lawrence, and always appreciate it. Always fun to talk to you. And I got to say, your approach, this sort of holistic view of conflicts and geopolitics, I think it's crucial. I wish more banks and financial institutions did this because I think they'd cut off some of the bad actors from the U.S. financial system. I think de-risking often gets a bad rap. I think it's actually more important now than ever. And anyway, it should be a fun conversation. Looking forward to it.
Amazing, amazing. So let's start with something I think that's on everyone's mind, which is I'll call it like the war scorecard. I mean, I think we were talking about this yesterday. We speak every couple of days, and I think it's fair to say we've been very pleasantly surprised with the achievements of the United States and Israel as it relates to the regime in Iran. Similarly, very pleasantly surprised with gains that were made in Lebanon. But just, stepping back from the headlines, if you could just like opine on both how successful the military operation is going, where you think it may go, and if there are any areas where you think they need to go further.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, first, let me just say that for those that are maybe not aware, the level of cooperation between Israel and the United States has just been remarkable. The Israelis that I talk to are still marveling at the fact that this is the first war that Israel has ever fought in English. And they're kind of looking at this war as maybe a test case for deeper cooperation. And it's good timing because there's a memorandum of understanding that's coming up for renegotiation. And I think the Israelis, I think are more optimistic about it now than they were before the war began. They're optimistic writ large about what's happening in mainland Iran, and I want to explain what I mean by that. That the bulk of the country right now is really just getting hammered. Something like 10,000 different strikes by the Israelis and the United States, strategic targets belonging to the regime, clerical targets, IRGC, Army, Navy, missiles, missile launchers, missile silos. I mean, the hits literally keep on coming. And the regime is losing power. Right now, they have something like under 1,000 rockets. It could actually even be closer to 500 right now, missiles rather. The ballistic missiles. The missile launchers are even fewer. They're saying probably about 160 or so. That's important because you can't get a missile up in the air without a missile launcher. And so the Israelis continue to hunt for those. The United States continues to hunt for those. And they're finding them and they're destroying them. And you just get a sense that, the regime is going to, I mean, look, they're still firing and they're still getting shots off and they're still landing some punches. But man, is it getting harder and harder for that to happen. They're getting more off when there's fog and inclement weather than they are when it's sunny out and bright out and no clouds. The Israelis are able to actually find things as they're getting moved out in preparation for launch, and they're destroying them. The U.S. is usually onto bigger targets. The Israelis are hunting for those smaller things. Incidentally, they're also protecting the Gulfies, which we can talk about as well. But in the meantime, I would say that things are going very well. They've thinned out the IRGC. They've thinned out the clerical establishment. The leadership is in total disarray. We hear this, I think, from just about everybody right now. So much so that the new Ayatollah, Khamenei Jr., as some people are calling him, not showing his face, not even clear that he's in Iran, possibly in Moscow, very likely crippled or very injured as a result of the strike against him and his father. We're all familiar with the whole cardboard cutout thing. It's weekend at Bernie's over there right now. I mean, nobody really has any idea who's running the place, and it looks like they're propping up a dead guy. So that's going really well. I would say that the places where it's not going well are in the Gulf because you're looking at drones, and Iran has plenty of those. And these Shahed drones are like $50,000 a pop to make, so they're not expensive. They buy the motors in mass quantities from the Chinese, and the Chinese are producing them at a pretty healthy clip. The short range rockets and missiles are what are hitting the Gulf states right now. It's really hard to stop those. They don't need missile launchers for that. And so the Gulf is getting pounded. And it is a little bit like right now. I mean, you can see them. They kind of want the war to stop, but they also want the war to continue. They don't like the pain, but they also don't like the solution. And the solution is to let this war go on for as long as possible so that the regime gets weaker and weaker and they don't have the ability after this to really mount attacks. Um, and then obviously there's Hormuz. And that, I got to say, it's a little bit surprising that we weren't preempting a move by the Iranians to act in the Hormuz Strait because every single war game, and we've done a bunch of these at FDD, but they do them at the Pentagon, they do them at the Kiryat, they do them in all the European capitals, every military in the world. When you do the war game on the Middle East, it always ends up that there's a crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, that there's an energy crisis, you need to solve it. We didn't preemptively do the things that I guess were needed in order to fix this. And so now we're sort of playing catch up. Now, I do think that there will be overwhelming firepower in the Strait of Hormuz soon. The question really is just, do we want to start having convoys where our ships are as vulnerable as some of the tankers that are getting hit? By the way, it's not like the regime has hit that many. I think they've hit 16 total tankers thus far. It makes it sound like they're just torching every tanker that comes through the Gulf. It's not what's happening. It's actually right now, it's more the fear that's baked in to the market. Nobody wants to go there anymore because they're afraid of what might happen based on past precedent. It's not as bad as everybody thinks, but we still have to solve it. And that's the one thing that I think the Iranians kind of got Trump where they want him because Donald Trump cares about the price of oil and he cares about the price of natural gas and he cares about the stock market. And all those things are getting wobbly or actually growing worse as a result of this crisis. So that's, I think, kind of a negative on the scorecard for now. Wait till the Marines get there and that may change. Something like 4,700 Marines that are on their way right now. Let's see what kind of damage they can do. The area that I think is also just interesting to watch, and I'll shut up after this, is what's happening in Israel itself. I mean, obviously the Israelis have now been in shelter almost consistently now for 3.5 weeks. That's a long time to shut down an economy where like virtually nothing is happening. But there are some really interesting things that I think we should just note. One is that the Israelis have really come together as a society in ways that I think the Iranians and many others maybe didn't expect. But fascinating right now, and this is one to watch, the Israelis have apparently done something that we hadn't seen before. Iron Dome, which is their short-range missile anti-missile system, the stuff that usually hits the short-range stuff coming out of Gaza, maybe South Lebanon. Those Tamir interceptors are now being deployed to destroy the ballistic missiles that are coming into Israel. This is a remarkable change for the Israelis. I think if you ask me, it's going to be unbelievably lucrative for the Israelis in years to come. In other words, what they figured out is that Iron Dome is it's not their first choice. They'd rather hit these ballistic missiles much higher up in the air, much further away from Israel. Quite frankly, I think they'd be happy if they landed in Jordan, not in Israel. But what they're able to do, though, is they're able to save Israeli lives. But more importantly, each of these Tamir interceptors costs like $100,000. Each of the Arrow interceptors, the ones that they use to hit the ballistic missiles further out in space, those cost $5 million. So you're looking at the reduction of cost of these missile interceptors by like more than 90%. That is an enormous innovation for the Israelis. And I'm really interested to see what happens if and when they decide to put these things on the open market for allies. My guess is that there's going to be a really lucrative moment for the Israelis.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that's pretty remarkable, I think we'd all agree, and maybe you could opine on this, and then and I see a bunch of questions just came in, I'll make sure to ask them, is the incredible technology that the Israelis and the United States have been using both to track enemies in Iran, locations, and trying to think about if whether some of those technologies have commercial purposes. So let me give you an example, right? If you're providing a listening device, right, and it's in Tehran somewhere because you want to track the Ayatollah, so you have to have unlimited power for a number, it could be months to years. You don't want it plugged into the grid, right? Because then it could be detected, right? And you're able to locate folks. And yet we have a challenge here in the West about power as it relates to data centers. So I'm wondering if you could like opine on the technology that's being used and whether you see from like a defense tech standpoint, maybe some of the applications that could help some of our challenges here as well.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll just note, by the way, these listening devices that you mentioned that are used in Tehran, what actually I think we ought to just acknowledge that the Israelis had a remarkable network of listening devices that they had inserted over the course of 20 years into Gaza. And it was probably the most, and I heard this from 8200, from Unit 8200 in Israel, that it was probably one of the most complex networks of listening devices that covered an area the size of Washington, D.C., where you could literally hear everybody talking at any given time in just about every corner of Gaza. And the Israelis had this, they built it. It was like probably one of their greatest achievements. And they literally had to go and destroy it. Right? They had to start picking apart Hamas's stronghold in Gaza, and so there's very little of it left. I would say that they're doing it to a lesser extent right now in Iran, but that's what these things are designed for, right? It is use or lose at a certain point, and right now, they're using and losing. And I think that's just something to watch because it does mean that our ability and the Israelis' ability to listen or to watch what's going on, it will diminish over time as this operation continues, at least to some extent. I don't think that the level of destruction is going to be Gaza level across Iran, but certainly in the places where it mattered most, you're seeing where the attacks are taking place. The big thing, if you ask me, that the Israelis are going to be able to monetize is this is the world's first AI war in the way that it's being. I mean, AI has been used in Ukraine. It's been used in other conflicts too, to a lesser degree. Nagorno-Karabakh in Armenia, Azerbaijan, for example, we know that there was an element of AI, but the Israelis using it has, really, put this into a different. It's a different solar system, a different planetary system. They are doing things that no one's ever done before. If you ask me, that's the thing that the Israelis are going to be able to monetize above all else. I mean, I do think that the missile defenses will be a big thing. By the way, I mean the Germans are already buying Arrow 3. They saw the level of success, and it's a lot cheaper than the THAAD. The THAAD, by the way, is 13 million or 18 million dollars an interceptor.
Doesn't work as
What's that?
well and doesn't work as well.
Well, actually, this time around, the Israelis are seeing that the U.S. has tweaked THAAD so that it's doing a lot more, and it's actually saving more lives right now than it did during the last time around. Arrow 3 was like an 83% success rate, and THAAD was like in the high 60s. So it was missing a lot more than the Israelis would care to see. It looks like the US has tweaked the algorithm and it's now up around where Arrow 3 is, which is better than it was before. So it's like in the mid to high 80s now in terms of interception rate, but it's not perfect. And we've seen that. You saw it in Dimona. And you saw it in Arad over the weekend. And you're going to continue to see strikes. No system is hermetic, but I do think that the AI solutions for warfare. By the way, this is a blessing and a curse because I got to say, the more they use AI, the easier it is to just sort of plug and play. You get a sense that our enemies will start to do that as well. It's a little bit like drone warfare. The Israelis pioneered it in the 1970s. They were starting to use drones. And back then they were really just more like model airplanes that, had a short battery life, and a low powered engine. Now we're looking at a different era of drone warfare, and the Iranians are quite good at it, and they're getting help from the Russians. I suspect that the AI component of this will be adopted soon by our enemies, the Israelis' enemies. And so I do worry about that. But I think for the moment anyway, this is the time where Israel is probably going to be able to cash in. The war ends, and you're going to see the startup nation on steroids as they begin to share some of what they learned with allied Western countries. I mean, whether they're allied, I guess, we'll still find out. But at least for now, they're saying the right things to the Israelis. The Europeans are not exactly coming to anybody's assistance here, but they're not the bad guys in this conflict, not by a long shot.
So I wanted to follow up on that with the Europeans because the Iranians launched two missiles at Diego Garcia. Both of them missed. One of them crashed on its own. One of them was intercepted. But it does show that they had an intention to launch a 4,000-kilometer missile, which would put Europe in the orbit as well. And there's been some rumors about the protecting the straits and demining the straits. The Europeans, Western Europeans from NATO, were going to come help. So do you have any insight on them coming? What that would look like? Does that
Yeah, yeah, I don't see them coming. I mean, for now anyway. I mean, I think if the Hormuz crisis gets worse, you could see some desperation because they rely more on that oil, quite frankly, than we do. The price of oil is going up, but the actual delivery of oil is going down for them. We don't need as much from the Strait. I think we get something like 2% from the Strait. So, and Donald Trump has said as much, like, hey, this is your problem. And right now they're not listening. But let me talk to you about that Diego Garcia missile attack the other day. I called some Israeli contacts after it happened, and what I got actually was really interesting. There were two things that everybody had their hair on fire about, and I can talk about both. One was the attack on Dimona, and the other was the attack on Diego Garcia. Both, I think, were overhyped, and I'll explain why. For the Diego Garcia attacks, what the Iranians did is they actually took the garden variety missiles, the ballistic missiles they've been firing at Israel, the ones that are the size of the bus and the whole thing, right? What they did is they depleted the warhead. There's virtually no explosives on the warhead. And the weight that would have normally gone to the warhead for the explosive materials was actually added back in fuel. So there was more fuel that enabled the same, missile to get close to Diego Garcia. And if it had hit, I don't want to say no damage would have been done, but as a friend of ours, Lawrence, told me, it was like a cap gun that was being fired from a long distance. Now, that doesn't make the Europeans like, they're not resting easier because they can't. I mean, I don't know how well they would even intercept a crappy missile sent by Iran. There are NATO defenses in and around Europe, but we haven't seen them activated in quite some time. So I think there's probably room to be nervous, but I do think that it was a bit overhyped. Like, see, you're in danger too. I do think that was the intent of the Iranians, was to say, hey, you know what? Like, we can hit that far, so don't you dare get into the Strait of Hormuz battle. Don't you dare come any closer to the Gulf. I think that was the message. But I think if you're really looking at what was there and what the threat was, I think they can still come if Donald Trump lets them and if they want to. So that was threat number one. The other one was Dimona. Obviously you see Dimona and immediately you go to your worst fears because this is the city where Israel has its, nuclear facilities and its nuclear research and everything else. And so everybody's thinking, oh my God, this could have been a catastrophic attack had it hit the right stuff. What I've been hearing from the Israelis is they are more than ready for an attack. They've been expecting an attack on Dimona. There are multiple attempts by the regime. Last time around, there were more. This time around, I think we've only seen one or two so far. And I think the regime may finally understand that first of all, it's defended well enough. There's enough stuff that's underground. They have fail-safe missile defense, but it's also spread around with redundancies in ways that they're not going to set back the nuclear program in Israel, and that the fissile material is not where everybody thinks it is. And so I think that was overhyped. But let me just say that these missiles are still incredibly dangerous. I'm still appalled every time I see Israelis not go into shelter and then people get injured, people get killed, and it's like it's unforced errors. It's human error here. It's yes, I mean we're seeing Iron Dome not always, or Arrow 3 not always activate. Iron Dome can't always be the fail-safe. There have been a few times where it misses. It's actually the faster missiles that get through, the ones that are traveling at faster speeds, and it's unclear to me why some travel faster than others. The slower ones are easier to intercept, but there are always going to be some that get through. And again, I think the Israelis have had an unbelievable interception rate. The death toll is incredibly low over there compared to the estimates that they had going into this war. They thought there was going to be like tens of thousands of people killed in this war. That's not what's happening. And it's the result of the successes of the United States and Israel on the ground, taking out the missiles and the launchers. And it's also the result of the missile defense. There is a question, though, about how long they can last, how long these missile defenses will be able to endure. I know they're still trying to produce more even as they use them, but I do get the sense that they're burning them rapidly. And that's one reason why you want this war to end more quickly. But that said, and this is interesting, I was talking to one Israeli contact recently who said that there is something of a paradox with what's going on with the Strait of Hormuz. Yes, we're all feeling the pain at the pump, and nobody likes seeing $5 gas and all of that stuff. But this guy was saying that Iran is putting itself into a box because the longer this war goes on, the more they're going to get hammered, right? Like they're getting degraded every day by like another 400-500 strikes, and they can't keep sustaining this. Their knees are starting to buckle, right? You get a sense that this regime cannot keep sustaining the beating that it's getting, and yet they're still hanging in there, right? They're like a boxer holding on to the ropes, just hoping that they can get to the bell, but there's no bell, right? Like as long as Donald Trump is still willing to do this, the Israelis are going to keep doing it. It all hinges, by the way, on on the MAGA king, as a friend of ours calls him. Like it all hinges on this guy. And right now, if you ask me what his plans are, the short answer is nobody knows, and that includes the Iranians. They have no idea how much longer this is going to go, and that's got to keep them very worried right now.
So I have three quick questions, and then we have a bunch of questions in the QA box. But I want to start with two countries that you and I no longer can visit, Turkey and Qatar. One of the things I'm very concerned with, and I've expressed this to you privately, and we have a lot of our friends on the call here from the Nagen Project who are fighting anti-Semitism, both in the United States, Canada, and globally. And this war is severely degrading the Shia axis for sure, right? And there's been
Yeah.
changes in Syria. Iran's, for all intents and purposes, is getting demolished. Lebanon seems to be moving in a somewhat better direction. But once that's over, you have the two countries who are the most supportive of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, like sort of the Sunni side of the jihadi coin, the Al Qaeda side, the ISIS side. Are they going to get stronger after this? And what does that say about anti-Semitism in the United States and in North America?
Yeah, I mean, great question. All right, here's how I would answer this because like they're not the same. I mean, this is the interesting thing. I mean, I do believe that the Qataris are going to keep funding the Turks in their effort to extend their influence around the region. But they kind of have to part ways a little bit here right now because the Qataris are getting hammered. And they've sustained a significant loss to their LNG production facility. As I understand, it's going to cost several $billion for them to fix it. And right now, they're unable to. I mean, apparently, they believe that their yearly LNG production is going to be down by something like 17, 20%. This is billions, tens of billions actually, that they're losing from this. And they're getting beat up. I mean, they're not used to this. They don't have a significant military. They don't have the ability to fight back. And so they're pretty bruised and battered right now. And I have to say, there is something absolutely poetic about the fact that when October 7th occurred, when that slaughter happened, that Hamas, the perpetrator of those attacks, their two primary patrons were Iran and Qatar. And right now, the Iranians are bombing Qatar. And it's just poetry, right? That these two, and Iran's getting hammered by the Israelis in the United States. In other words, what they started, they can't finish, and they're getting shellacked for it. And there is something just, I mean, utterly, heartwarming when you watch the Qataris and the Iranians pay the price for something that they unleashed 2.5 years ago. I do think that there's some poetic justice here. As far as the Turks are concerned, I mean, I will tell
Can I
you, I
just
was
interrupt you
sitting.
for one second, John? And remember when we used to go in and everyone would tell us how great an investment Turkey is, right? And we're like, we were just in the Treasury Department and we know they're going to get hammered. And if everyone
Yeah,
would listen to us, they would have saved millions of dollars after their currency plummeted. So John,
yep.
you've been one of the experts on Turkey for a long time. And we saw Erdogan using hot cash and money in, money out, sanctions busting, gas for gold schemes. You've been on top of this for a very, very long time. But where do they come out?
Yeah, I mean, so the Turks, I mean, it's really interesting. I was sitting with let's just say a Western intelligence guy yesterday. And we had like a kind of a mind meld on the Turks. Look, Turkey has in the past supported Hamas. They still do. In fact, this week, the intelligence chief just hosted Hamas at his headquarters in Istanbul. They right now they're funding Hezbollah and arming Hezbollah. That's not well known, but it will be well known soon enough. I've heard this, by the way, from Lebanese, from Israelis, and from Cypriots, and I'm hearing it from like official channels, unofficial channels. It's going to get out soon. And it's going to be surprising to a lot of people because nobody thinks of Hezbollah as a Turkish proxy. They think of it as an Iranian proxy. That's a problem. The Turks have, they've been sponsors of ISIS. They helped Iran evade sanctions to the tune of $20 billion. And that's, of course, why at one point the lira really dropped the way that it did because we actually broke open this sanctions busting scheme that they were behind. So they're an illicit actor. But when I look out across the region right now, the Turks, they have a foothold in Gaza with Hamas. They've got a foothold in Lebanon with Hezbollah. They effectively control the regime in Syria. The Shara regime is, I mean, it is owned and controlled by the Turks. The Turks are in northern Iraq, where they've been fighting the Kurds. They have a base in Qatar. They have multiple bases in the Horn of Africa. They've got their navy deployed all across the Mediterranean. And right now they've got a squadron of F-16s in northern Cyprus. So when you look out at the region right now, as Iran begins to kind of buckle and may fall, there is only one country right now that has the ability to fill the void, and that is Turkey. And so it's for that reason that FTD, we're doing a ton of work right now, getting up to speed on their strategy, what their leaders are saying, the illicit activity that they've been involved with, the illicit finance, all of that stuff. And we've been doing it for years, but we're going to redouble those efforts, knowing that this is likely going to be the next challenge to stability in the Middle East. So keep an eye on it.
So I have one final question, and then we're going to get to the Q&A. So, the fighting with Iran, do you have any sense? Let me ask you it in like three parts. How long you think this is going to go on, and at what level? Number one. What does success look like for the United States and for Israel at the end of the day? And also talk a little bit about, you and I have traveled a lot in the Gulf, working with the Saudis and the Emiratis and Bahrainis and Omanis on normalization. It seems to me that this conflict with Iran, even though at the beginning some of the Gulf states said we don't want to fight with Iran. Now they're pushing the United States to continue the war, and maybe that'll bring a normalization even closer together. So if you could try and quickly answer those three questions, and then we'll get to the audience Q&A.
Yeah, look, I don't. Everybody thought that this war was going to end by March 31st because that was when Xi Jinping and Donald Trump were supposed to have their summit. Trump has postponed that. It's now, as I saw today, it's now postponed to, I think, May 15th or 16th. And so right now, that would be the new end of the war. But that seems a long way off from here. I think we're going to see some resolution to this thing sooner. I do think so. I think that victory for the United States is, no nuclear program and probably no missiles. I don't know if they can make a demand on the proxies, but let me just say the beating that the Iranians have just taken, it's going to be really hard for them to fund proxies to the same levels that they were. It is going to be really difficult. And I do think, again, talking to this Western Intel guy that I chatted with yesterday, he said something interesting to me. He said, like, this may not end in regime change in the sense that we dictate who comes in and who goes out, but the regime will be changed. In other words, they can't sustain this. The sanctions that have been on there and how it's crippled their economy, and now the beating that they're taking from the Israelis and the United States 2 years in a row, massive destruction, setbacks economically. They're a mess. And now their leadership has been thinned out. They've lost their longtime leader who was in power since 1989. This is a major disruption for them from a leadership perspective. The IRGC is getting hammered. The clerics are fewer. I mean, they are going to have to adjust. And what that adjustment looks like is, I think, going to be really the interesting thing here if the regime hangs on. But don't expect this to just be the same regime. The assessment inside the intelligence community is change is coming, whether it's positive or negative is kind of the big question. But I think continuing to beat up this regime and making it feel like there is no out. That's what's important here. The Israelis would love this thing to keep going, and they may keep it going. We hear a little bit out of Israel right now about the possibility of a phase 2 of this battle. So Donald Trump pulls the cord. He says, that's it, we're done. And the Israelis say, got it, no more F-35s, right? The no more F-35s doesn't mean that they're not going to start throwing a huge amount of weapons and cash and communications and intelligence into Iran in an attempt to bring out the people and to have them rise up again. Now, I got to tell you, the biggest concern that I have, and we don't talk about it a lot at FDD in public. It's fine to talk about it, though, and it's certainly fine to talk about it in a setting like this. The Iranian people may not be anywhere near as unified as we all hope. And that, I got to say, is probably like the biggest concern that I have is that, the minorities make up something like 49% of the country, and the minorities dislike the Persian majority that are a mere 51%. And so you're talking about the Arabs and the Kurds and the Azeris and the Baluch and the Zoroastrians and the Circassians and the list goes on and on and on. And they are they're the big black box. We just don't know whether they come together or not. And so a lot of this, whether there is a phase 2 or not, we'll find out. But the idea of stirring the people to come out into the streets, it really depends on the unity of the people, and we're concerned. As far as normalization is concerned, I do think that there's going to be enormous opportunities. I still do think that the other wars around the region have to end before normalization can truly take hold. And there I'm talking about like you need the Lebanon conflict, which is just heating up. We haven't even talked about that. But if you see Lebanese Arabs getting killed in the streets, it's not going to sit well with the Saudis. It's not going to sit well with any of the other countries of the region. Similarly, whatever's going on in Gaza, there is this need to kind of wrap it all up. And so it still may be a bit. But I will say this, that the Arab states will not forget that it was only the Israelis and the United States that fought this battle against their hated enemy. These countries have always hated Iran more than they've hated Israel. And now Israel has actually taken out their greatest threat. They see what an alliance with the United States does. You can see how powerful this is for the Israelis. And they're going to want a piece of this. And the air defenses couldn't live without it. So if you ask me, there's a really interesting thing that's happening here. And you're thinking about markets. You just say that when this is all said and done, even before we talk about normalization, there is also this question of where were the Chinese in all of this? They weren't helping. They weren't calling on Iran to deconflict. They were not making sure that other tankers got out of the Gulf, out of the Strait. It was only theirs that they cared about. And I got to tell you, these Arab countries, they're now looking at China and they're saying, I don't know if we want your Belt and Road. I don't know if we want your partnership. I don't think that you're a great power any longer. You're kind of a middle power that you weren't here to help us. And so if you ask me, Donald Trump has done something already, and people don't, I think, understand this achievement. He's won over now he has to continue to win and he needs to leave on the right terms. But right now, if he locks in this game, he has taken the Persian Gulf from a, hedging between China and the United States in the great power competition to a win. They are going to appreciate the United States for years to come. So normalization aside, and I think that would be a nice added benefit. I love that this could be a deciding moment for the Gulf states who bring with them enormous amounts of money and energy, which will be incredibly helpful in our AI race and in energy dominance and all these policies that we have. I think there's some interesting things that may come out of this that will redound to Trump's benefit, regardless of what happens to the regime. And I think that's just sort of not yet fully understood by most analysts.
So I have a bunch of questions here. There's on all the topics you just referenced. So we'll do a little bit of a rapid fire. I'm not going to mention the questioners' names because I don't know if they wanted me to, but the first question is a good one. If the Iranian airspace is closed for all intents and purposes, I mean, the United States and Israel has destroyed their air defenses. We have a huge fleet of naval vessels around their borders. How are they getting resupplied? And not only with war materials, and you mentioned drones. I mean, I think they have a domestic capacity to produce those. They're not importing those, but also like daily necessities, like food and medicine. Like, are there like the ghost fleet that we hear sometimes in the Straits that are resupplying them?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's definitely ghost fleets. There's definitely, I mean, look, wartime profiteering is like, I mean, it's a national pastime in the Middle East, and so even the countries that are probably getting bombarded, some of them are privately working with the Iranians to get them what they need. Don't forget the Omanis here. I mean, the Dows that are probably just crossing the strait. They're providing all kinds of stuff. They always have, by the way. Um, and it's always gone both ways. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the wartime profiteering remains big. But there are, I think, still some civilian flights that have come in and come out. And you may have seen this. I mean, flights to Moscow, and I'm assuming they come back. I've not watched flight trackers on this, so it's not been the major area of focus for me. But yeah, don't underestimate how people are going to be trying to make a buck off of this war and how Iran's willing to pay. As far as the resupply on drones and stuff, let me just say the Iranians are considered to be a drone superpower. They have an enormous number of drones, and I don't think they've even used a quarter of them so far. So there is just going to be a lot more where that came from, and also these short-range rockets that are hitting the Gulf a lot more where they come from. The thing is that the ballistic missiles are going to start to drop. The Israelis are going to feel less pain over the course of time. They're not going to get to zero, by the way. They will never be at zero. There will always be like the one off that they can get out. But yeah, I mean, I think the goal is to really bring it to a trickle. The Israelis come out, they can do more. They can do more cyber. They can do all sorts of things against the Islamic Republic, and then we'll have to really worry more about the Gulf states. And there, I wouldn't be surprised if the Israelis put like some kind of Iron Dome on a boat and tried to help save their Gulf allies. But the only way they're going to do that is by finishing Lebanon first.
Yeah, there was a question
That's yeah,
about,
that's their next big one.
and I want to infer something from the next question. President Trump, sometimes I think it's fair to say speaks from the hip, to be generous. And you're right. I mean, he creates a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in our adversaries, sometimes also with our allies, and even folks in DC. But he's basically saying the regime is changed already, right? So I guess the question here is there any basis where it can be said that we've already won the war? Like we've achieved what we wanted to achieve in Iran. Time to wrap it up. Their missiles are
Yeah.
degraded, their navy's
Yeah.
degraded, their air force is destroyed, their leadership 4 rungs down is all killed. Moshtaba is missing a leg and is hiding in Moscow. I mean, did we win?
Look, my assessment is we won, but we didn't get the big win, right? Like we degraded their military. We made it so that it's going to take years for them to come back from this. They're going to have to pay an enormous amount of money to rebuild the country. They're a mess, right? And we did that, right? We just broke a bunch of stuff, and they're going to have to fix it, and that's imposing our will on an enemy, and that's great, right? I think the next question is, can you deplete certain other capabilities, missiles, number one. There is the enriched uranium that is, still floating around somewhere inside Iran. And, I think, apparently the US and Israel know where it is, but it's going to take, pretty significant ground forces, special forces operation in order to get it. That would be an even better win to do that. Bringing down the regime entirely so that they literally wave the white flag, and there's some kind of surrender ceremony. That's the big win. But let me just say, and it's funny, this is probably my next article for commentary, that we don't live in an era where people surrender anymore. I mean, when's the last time we saw something like this? I think it was Imperial Japan, where somebody says, yeah, like we're waving the white flag. We've officially given up on this war.
Patriots, Super Bowl.
You mean when they lost to the Eagles?
Yes.
Sorry. So, you could maybe also argue that this happened during the Cold War, right? That the Soviets, like, they agreed to dismantle and be done, and that was it. But when you look at all these other wars that we, played out over the last several decades, right? Iraq never gave up and they kept fighting, and obviously we ended up leaving. Not as bad as it was, but still not the outcome we were looking for. Afghanistan, we won. They kept fighting, and now the Taliban's back. And Hamas, how many times did they get, shellacked by the Israelis? And yet they're still there. And they're still there now after losing 53% of the territory that they controlled and losing 35,000 soldiers. And yet they're still fighting. Hezbollah, same thing. Grim Beeper took out all these, top commanders, and the Israelis destroyed 80% of their arsenal, and yet they're still fighting. So this idea somehow that we're going to walk away with like this clean, definitive win, it's not a thing, right? And I think, Donald Trump needs to understand that, and he needs to be able to frame this the right way. I do think that both sides are looking for an off-ramp right now. The Iranians want something that will allow them to have their dignity. They want to say that they ended this war with strength. That is not in the administration's interest. They're going to be pushing back against this notion. And that's one of the reasons why I think we've reached a stalemate right now with these talks. The Iranians think that they can convince the United States that, hey, just let us say that we can take the win. They got the wrong president for that. Donald Trump doesn't let the other guy take the win. He's going to take the win. That's the only thing that he wants out of this. So that's why we're stuck. But it is this interesting thing, this, kind of gray area where nobody wins, nobody loses. If you survive, you've won when you fought a more powerful enemy. So every time the Israelis win, but they don't destroy Hamas, Hamas comes out and they say, we won because we're still here. That's what the regime will try to do. And that's why it's so important for this effort to continue for as long as it's humanly possible. I do realize that there are constraints in terms of oil, and I do understand that Donald Trump is more sensitive to those than others. And I get why Americans are feeling the pain at the pump and elsewhere. I think it's worth trying for another, week, 2 weeks to see how much more we can get. And then I think it's up to the Israelis or whoever else, all these intelligence services that I'm sure, including the Arab intelligence services, by the way, all the bombing that they've sustained in the Gulf. I got to imagine the Saudis, the Emiratis, even the Qataris, they're probably like, hey, Mossad, here's some money. Bring down those bastards, right? Because we've had enough. Like, I think there are going to be a lot of people, if the regime somehow hangs on, there are going to be a lot of governments out there who say, okay, we're here to help on phase two. We really want to see these guys fall.
So let me ask you a bit of a tangential dotted line question, because you've done a lot of work on sanctions, right, and illicit finance. And let's say hypothetically the regime does survive in some capacity and there are still some sanctions put on the regime to keep up a maximum pressure campaign. I mean, sanctions only work when we have the US dollar is strong, right? And it's the reserve currency, and yet we have maybe some of our allies who are, in BRICS and others who are trying to, transact not in the US dollar and other currencies. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about why the strength of the US economy is extremely important for security.
Sure. I mean, look, when we put sanctions on other countries, it matters a great deal because we created the electronic banking system. Those ones and zeros that make up all those transactions, those are ours. We own those ones and zeros. The dollar being the reserve currency for oil trading, for example. I mean, on the one hand, right now it's an albatross for us. So we actually can be self-sufficient as it relates to oil production and energy production, and yet we're tethered to the global market. And people are like, well, why not just cut that off? Well, because they're using the dollar for every transaction when they buy and sell oil all around the world. A, that brings us money, but B, it gives us some power. And there's a reason why, the US dollar, I mean, I always marveled when like we were fighting ISIS and they're paying their fighters in dollars, right? It's the war zone currency because it's the thing that everybody trusts. So this affords us an enormous amount of leverage. People want access to our markets. They want access to our stock market. They want access to our businesses. FDI is crucial to us, but it's more important to them. They want to be able to make money in a transparent system. So this is the key, right? We need to keep that dollar. I mean, it doesn't have to be strong. It needs to be trusted, right? It doesn't, the value of the dollar actually matters a little less than just the fact that it is still the ubiquitous currency that is used worldwide. That affords us leverage. It's how we can impose sanctions. It's how we can tell other countries to impose sanctions. It really has been and I'll just say when I was at the Treasury, and if you got a call from the Undersecretary of Treasury for TFI, Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, if you got a call from him and you're with a bank or a major corporation, you got a call saying, we have a problem with something that you're doing, you fix it because you want to make sure that you're still connected to the US Treasury, that you can benefit from our system. And that's true abroad, it's true at home. And so yeah, we need to keep that going.
So another question, just you referenced it a little bit earlier about the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, we have a huge fleet there. Maybe the Europeans come, maybe they don't. But I'm assuming we have the capability, if we want to demine the Strait of Hormuz, and one would assume we've already taken out their installations along the coast, so less likely RPGs and rocket and missile attacks.
I think we have the ability to take out those mines. I think there's only 12 of them laid so far, and I don't know how much more they're going to be able to lay, but it's a problem and they need to be taken care of, and that is very likely what the Marines are being dispatched to do. The removal of the weapons up and down the coast is actually more of a concern. You can go back like 10 miles or whatever it is, or 10 clicks, I guess it is, not 10 miles. And you can clear things out. You can obviously get non-essential personnel out of the strait. In other words, nobody moves. If you see movement, you're gone. So everybody get out. If you're not actually loading oil onto a tanker, you are not allowed to be there. And there can be a clearing operation for all of that. It's not that big of a place. And I think, good quick work can be done. The problem is the topographical advantage from the mountains from further away. These are the things that I think are making the military nervous. For anybody who's interested, last week, Mark Montgomery from FDD, Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, wrote a piece actually for the New York Times writing about kind of what the plan is. And, you get a sense of the complexity of it. This is not simple. You will, probably see incoming fire against some of these ships. I keep hearing that there's one variant in particular. It's a Russian-made surface-to-sea missile called the Yakhant. The Hezbollah terror group used it against Israel during their last major conflict in 2006, I believe it was. We've seen them pop up here and there, but apparently they're quite deadly. These are the things that, you could lose men, you could lose assets, you could lose vessels, you could lose aircraft. Even as you successfully patrol the strait, you can still get hit. And I think this is the stuff that has really sparked a interesting debate between, we call them the isolationists and the interventionists, but you've got a lot of people from the isolationist camp saying, look, you know what, you were able to do this on the relative cheap. None of this was cheap, by the way, with the munitions that we dropped and, the mobilization of forces. But, relatively speaking, it wasn't like the trillions of dollars that we spent in Iraq or Afghanistan. We weren't losing thousands of soldiers, right? 13 is obviously still a tragedy, but it's not the thousands that we saw falling in Afghanistan and Iraq. Um, but the debate's starting to creep in again here in town of like, do we actually want to put boots on the ground, so to speak, or boots in the ocean? That doesn't sound like a good thing for those who are warning that we're going to get sucked into another, forever war in the Middle East. And so some of those debates are coming. And I got to tell you, the Strait of Hormuz, the idea of military operations to liberate it, that's what's got everybody nervous right now. Like, here it is, right? Here's that Iraq moment that we've all been trying to avoid. We've arrived. And by the way, you may have noticed, but J.D. Vance is actually part of the delegation negotiating with the Iranians, or at least he was. He's one of those. He's one of the isolationists. He's one of the skeptics of foreign wars, and he doesn't want to see Americans getting killed in action over there. And so my guess is that he's probably more interested right now as we enter into this potential ground and Navy phase with the Marines coming in than maybe he was from just air operations where, the risk was going to be a lot lower.
So let me ask you one final question and infuse Lebanon in this because we do have a question about Lebanon, and I have a feeling it was going to be part of your answer anyways. But given where we are today, think 6 months from now, or let's say even to be more realistic, 12 months from now, and we think about risk from this perspective of the United States, what are we overestimating and what are we underappreciating as it relates to risk?
I mean, look, I think we may be overestimating the extent to which that this regime can pose any real risk to the region after this war. They're going to be exhausted and beat up, and they just may not have the will. And again, that assessment that there's going to be change within the regime, even if it survives, I think is an interesting thing to watch. I gotta say, I'm still very wary of this regime. Even if it survives, it could be a wounded animal, and therefore more dangerous, but it could be less dangerous as a result of this war just as easily. And so, that's one to watch. I don't know if I can predict here which way we're going to go. I tend to be more of a pessimist by nature, and it's usually proven me right. So I'm concerned, but I will say that, there's a chance that it will be that this regime understands that it has to be more pragmatic if it wants to live in the region, because people are not going to let them live this down for a while. Um, I think that the Lebanese government has been absolutely overrated by everybody here in this city, thinking that, oh, yeah, well, they're sick of Hezbollah too, so this is the moment to get rid of them. They're not doing it. I mean, I just had lunch today with someone who works with the Lebanese armed forces, and he was just telling me that there is still no political will. There is nothing there on the ground that's going to help Israel get rid of this. And so I actually suspect that there's going to be some tough days ahead for Lebanon. Not that it's in great shape economically right now, but wow. I don't know if you can short a falling knife, but I would absolutely look for whatever ways because that just does not look like a good outlook for Lebanon right now. I'm definitely interested to see whether Qatar continues to spread money around in the West, in our education system, things like that. They may have reached peak soft power before the war, and right now we may start to see it diminish. We also may see a loss of appetite for them to do what they were doing before, kind of throwing money around, buying influence, and engaging in all manner of malign, financial activity. But in terms of the real threat, again, I would just stress keep an eye on Turkey. Turkey has the ability to project power with its own military, second largest army in NATO, and it has the ability to project power by way of proxy, which is the other thing that I'm deeply concerned about right now. As Hamas begins to lose power, or Iran does rather.
Excellent. So I think we're just about out of time. We like to be mindful of everyone's time and generosity with their time, and we're about an hour in. John, I want to thank you. as always. I mean, look, we've been friends for a very long time. That doesn't mean you have to say yes every time I ask you to do one of these, but you always do say yes. And we're very grateful for the relationship that we have at Omnia with you, and you're our sounding board as we think about geopolitics as it relates to investments. And you've been so helpful for our families. You've been so helpful for our other clients that we work with, like Nagin, helping fight back against anti-Semitism here in the United States. And we look for many other opportunities. God willing.
Same. By the way, I'll just note, by the way, that we have the Center on Sanctions and or actually now it's called Center on Economic and Financial Power. We are actually right now in the process of a new project cooking up risk profiles for countries that don't exactly, make it onto most people's radar. So countries like South Africa, Malaysia, you're going to see the risks that come with these countries that maybe are not baked into the market. Happy to share those with you when they're ready. We can maybe have the team come on to talk about those as well if you want to do something on a more regular basis.
Well, I'm going to assume that that means yes, you agree to do the next one. I actually think that's a really interesting project, and I think it would be very interesting and valuable for us and for our family. So thank you. Thanks to everyone who's joined. Thanks for your questions. If you want to get in touch with John directly, just shoot me a text or an email, and I'm happy to put you in touch. And it was an amazing conversation, John, and we're very grateful, and our country blesses your work. Thank you.